She was just 6 years old. Crying alone on the cold airport floor. Thousands passed by but no one stopped. Until a millionaire did. What he discovered next will leave you speechless. And in tears. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. And tell me. What time is it where you are? Let's see how far this story reaches across the world. The first crack in her guarded shell. Lila's small hand touched the scarf, her eyes flickering with something like hope, but a memory darkened her facial mother's voice, singing lullabies before a fire stole her away when Lila was 4. She hadn't spoken of it, but the notebook's drawings told Ethan enough: a home lost, a mother gone, a child alone. He offered her a granola bar from his bag, and she nibbled it slowly, her trust a fragile thread. "We're going to find that house, Lila," he promised, his voice steady despite the weight of her mystery. The road stretched toward Rosewood, its fields dusted with morning frost, but a black SUV appeared in the rearview mirror, its steady pace chilling Ethan's blood. Lila noticed, her body stiffening, her small voice trembling. "They're following us, aren't they?" Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel, his mind racing. Who was after this child, and why? Her notebook mentioned an E and a fire, clues to a past she was too young to understand. "You're safe with me," he said, his tone fierce, a vow to himself as much as to her. He sped up, the sedan weaving through backroads, but the SUV stayed close, its dark windows hiding whoever hunted her. Lila's eyes flicked to Ethan, searching for safety, and he forced a calm smile, hiding his own fear. A memory of his sister flashed her laughter, gone too soon, and he knew he couldn't fail Lila. He took a sharp turn, tires squealing. The SUV still trailing like a shadow. Lila hugged her notebook tighter, its pages her only link to her mother's promise of a place where roses never died. "Tell me about the house," Ethan said, hoping to distract her. "It's pretty," she whispered. "With flowers everywhere." "Mommy said it's home." Her words pierced him, a child's hope against a world too cruel. The SUV's headlights glared closer, and Ethan's pulse raced. Whoever they were, they wanted Lila, or her notebook, or both. He reached over, resting a hand near hers, not touching but close enough to comfort. "We'll get there, kiddo," he said, his voice a lifeline. The road to Rosewood loomed ahead, promising answers or danger, and Ethan felt the weight of a child's trust, a burden heavier than any merger, yet one he'd carry to keep her safe. Lila's tiny frame curled on the icy tile of Terminal Tessera, her pink coat frayed at the seams, soaked at the sleeves from wiping tears no one seemed to notice, her messy blonde hair clinging to her cheeks as passengers rushed past with purpose, ignoring the fragile sound of a child sobbing into the noise of rolling luggage and overhead announcements. She clutched a small teddy bear with one eye missing and sat beside a vending machine like a forgotten bag, too quiet for security, too invisible for kindness. Her feet, dangling above the ground in scuffed shoes too small for comfort, kicked absently as her swollen eyes scanned the crowds, hoping for one familiar face, her mother's, yet finding only strangers too busy to care. Announcements echoed around her about flights bound for Paris, Dubai, and New York, but none for the little girl waiting all alone. She whimpered softly, shivering as the cold floor seeped into her bones, and still, no one saw her pain. A businessman on a call walked right past her, muttering about profits while she whispered, "Mommy?" To no one. A mother dragging her toddler looked at Lila for half a second before averting her gaze. A flight attendant gave her a glance, then kept walking. Every second was another silent rejection. Another heartbreak for a child too young to understand abandonment. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Please. Someone." But the airport swallowed her words like it had swallowed her hope. Her stomach ached from hours without food, her mouth dry from crying, her mind a fog of fear and questions she couldn't form. She wasn't sure how long it had been since her mommy told her, "Wait here, sweetie, I'll be right back." Maybe an hour. Maybe forever. She didn't know time, only the weight of being left behind. As tears traced paths down her dirt-smudged cheeks, she hugged the bear tighter, its fur matted with old love and fresh grief. Her lips trembled, and a soft whimper slipped out again, barely louder than the dragging suitcase wheels echoing off the high glass ceiling. Then, amid the stampede of indifference, a pause, a quiet breath in the chaos. Expensive shoes halted in front of her. She looked up slowly, fearful and unsure. each stroke of pencil revealing a house framed by roses, their thorns sharp even in graphite. The journal entries, scrawled in a trembling hand, spoke of a mother's love, a lost home, and a shadowy figure named E. One entry stopped him cold. He promised we'd be safe, but the fire took everything. Ethan's pulse quickened. The words hinted at betrayal, loss, maybe danger. His tech empire thrived on solving puzzles, but this felt personal, urgent. He activated his AI system, its interface glowing as it scanned the notebook's contents, cross-referencing names and locations. A hit. Lila Harper, Arbara Wurashron, last seen in a small upstate town called Rosewood, linked to a missing persons case from Elfan Watisra. Ethan's mind raced. Why was she running, and what tied her to this cryptic house? Below, the city hummed, indifferent, but his heart thudded with purpose he hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, across the river in a Brooklyn shelter, Lila huddled on a creaky cot, her stomach knotted with hunger and fear. The loss of her notebook felt like losing her mother all over again. It held the only map to her past, to answers she'd chased since she was Sitte Archer. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, soft but firm, "Keep going, Lila. Find the truth." To survive, she'd taken a job at a greasy diner, washing dishes for cash under the table, her hands raw from scalding water. The shelter's dim lights flickered, casting shadows that made her flinch. Every creak felt like a threat. She'd learned to trust no one, not since the fire that stole her mother and her home. Yet Ethan's face, kind despite his polished edges, lingered in her thoughts. Why had he helped her? His coat, still draped over her shoulders, smelled faintly of cedar and wealth, a reminder of a world she'd never touch. She pushed the memory away, focusing on survival. She needed that notebook back, its pages her only guide to the house where roses never died. At the diner, a man in a dark coat lingered at the counter, his gaze too sharp, too knowing. Lila's breath caught. She'd seen him before, in another city, another life. She slipped out the back, heart pounding, unaware that Ethan's AI had just pinged her location. Back in his penthouse, Ethan studied the screen, Rosewood's coordinates glowing like a beacon. The notebook's final entry chilled him. "E knows where I am. I can't stop now." Who was E, and why did Lila run? Ethan's life had been about control mergers, algorithms, predictable outcomes, but this mystery defied logic. He closed the notebook, its weight grounding him. His sister's laugh flashed in his memory, her absence a wound he'd never healed. Helping Lila felt like a chance to reclaim something lost, to be more than the cold CEO he'd become. He called his private investigator, voice steady but urgent, "Find her. Now." The city sparkled below, but Ethan saw only Lila's scar, her trembling hands, her desperate flight. He didn't know her story, but the notebook's clues were a thread he couldn't ignore. As he stared at the sketches, the roses seemed to pulse, whispering secrets he was determined to unravel. Across town, Lila moved through Brooklyn's shadows, unaware that her path and Ethan's were about to collide again, pulled by a mystery that could either save or destroy them both. The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly, casting a sickly yellow glow over the cracked linoleum and grease-stained counter where Lila scrubbed plates in the back. Her hands, chapped from hours in soapy water, trembled as she glanced at the Clocathnan a.m., the graveyard shift's quiet hour. Brooklyn's chill seeped through the diner's thin walls, and Ethan's coat, still draped over her shoulders, was her only shield against it. She hadn't stopped thinking about him, his unexpected kindness at the airport, a puzzle she couldn't solve. Was he a savior or a threat? Her life had taught her to assume the latter, ever since the fire that claimed her mother and set her running. The diner's lone customer, a man in a dark coat, sipped coffee too slowly, his eyes flicking toward her with a predator's patience. Her stomach twisted. She'd seen that look before, in cities she'd fled, shadows that never let her rest. The bell above the door jingled, and Ethan Caldwell stepped in, his presence jarring in the diner's grime. His charcoal suit hugged his frame, but his face carried a tension that didn't match the polished CEO she'd glimpsed at JFK. Lila froze, the plate in her hand nearly slipping. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low, sharp with suspicion. Ethan raised his hands, palms open, the tattered notebook clutched in one. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice steady but warm, like a fire she wanted to trust but couldn't. He slid the notebook across the counter, its familiar weight a lifeline to her mother's memory. "You left this. I thought you'd want it back." Lila's breath caught, relief warring with distrust. She snatched the notebook, her fingers brushing his, a fleeting warmth that startled her. "You didn't read it," she said, more plea than statement. Ethan's eyes, a deep hazel, held hers. "I did," he admitted, "but only to find you. I want to help." Her laugh was bitter, cutting. "Help? You don't even know me." She backed away, clutching the notebook like armor. Ethan leaned closer, voice dropping. "I know you're scared. I know you're running. Let me help you find that house." The mention of the Rose house, from her own private pages, felt like a violation, yet his sincerity disarmed her. She studied him clean-shaven, confident, but with a shadow of loss in his gaze, something she recognized from her own reflection. Her mother's words echoed, "Trust when it feels right, Lila." Did it? She didn't know, but the man in the dark coat was still there, his presence a ticking clock. "If I say yes," she whispered, "you don't ask about my past. Deal?" Ethan nodded, a flicker of relief softening his features. "Deal." The diner's air grew heavier, the man in the coat now staring openly, his fingers tapping a rhythm that felt like a warning. Ethan noticed, his posture shifting, protective. "We should go," he said, glancing at the exit. Lila's heart raced. She didn't trust him, not fully, but the notebook was back, and the man in the coat was too close. She nodded, slipping into the back to grab her bag, her mother's locket tucked inside. Ethan waited by the door, his car keys in hand, a sleek black sedan parked outside. As they stepped into the night, the man in the coat stood, his shadow stretching long across the diner's floor. Lila's pulse hammered. She didn't know Ethan, didn't know if this was a mistake, but the notebook's weight in her hands felt like a sign. "Where to?" she asked, voice barely steady. Ethan's gaze met hers, resolute. "Somewhere safe." The sedan's engine purred to life, but as they pulled away, headlights flared in the rearview mirror, too close, too deliberate. Lila's grip tightened on the notebook, its cryptic promise of roses and truth her only anchor. Ethan's hands steadied on the wheel, his calm a contrast to her fear, but his eyes flicked to the mirror, betraying a shared unease. Their alliance, fragile and untested, was born in that moment, a thread of trust stretched taut against the darkness chasing them. The sedan's engine hummed softly as Ethan Caldwell guided it along the winding highway, the dawn sky painting the horizon in hues of pink and gold, a stark contrast to the tension gripping his heart. In the passenger seat, year-old Lila Harper sat small and fragile, her tiny hands clutching her tattered notebook, its pages filled with crayon drawings of a house wreathed in roses. Her oversized hoodie Ethan's from the airport swallowed her frame, making her look even smaller, her dark curls spilling over the collar. Her wide eyes, bright but shadowed with fear, darted to the window, watching the passing fields as if they might hide answers or threats. Ethan glanced at her, his usual world of boardrooms and algorithms feeling distant, replaced by an unfamiliar urge to protect this child who'd upended his life in a single glance. "You warm enough, Lila?" he asked, voice gentle, adjusting the car's heater. She nodded, barely, her lips pressed tight, as if words were treasures she couldn't afford to spend. At the airport, her panicked flight from security had left him with her notebook and a responsibility he couldn't shake. Now, driving to Rosewood, the town tied to her cryptic sketches felt like a guardian, not a CEO. "Want some music?" he offered, hoping to ease her silence. Lila's fingers tightened on the notebook, but she pointed to the radio, her voice a whisper, something happy. Ethan tuned to a cheerful pop song, its upbeat rhythm filling the car, and for a moment, her shoulders relaxed. At a gas station, he bought her a bright red scarf, wrapping it gently around her neck. "It's like a superhero cape," he said, earning a tiny smile, the first crack in her guarded shell. Lila's small hand touched the scarf, her eyes flickering with something like hope, but a memory darkened her face. Her mother's voice, singing lullabies before a fire stole her away when Lila was 4. She hadn't spoken of it, but the notebook's drawings told Ethan enough: a home lost, a mother gone, a child alone. He offered her a granola bar from his bag, and she nibbled it slowly, her trust a fragile thread. "We're going to find that house, Lila," he promised, his voice steady despite the weight of her mystery. The road stretched toward Rosewood, its fields dusted with morning frost, but a black SUV appeared in the rearview mirror, its steady pace chilling Ethan's blood. Lila noticed, her body stiffening, her small voice trembling. "They're following us, aren't they?" Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel, his mind racing. Who was after this child, and why? Her notebook mentioned an E and a fire, clues to a past she was too young to understand. "You're safe with me," he said, his tone fierce, a vow to himself as much as to her. He sped up, the sedan weaving through backroads, but the SUV stayed close, its dark windows hiding whoever hunted her. Lila's eyes flicked to Ethan, searching for safety, and he forced a calm smile, hiding his own fear. A memory of his sister flashed, her laughter, gone too soon, and he knew he couldn't fail Lila. He took a sharp turn, tires squealing, the SUV still trailing like a shadow. Lila hugged her notebook tighter, its pages her only link to her mother's promise of a place where roses never died. "Tell me about the house," Ethan said, hoping to distract her. "It's pretty," she whispered, "with flowers everywhere. Mommy said it's home." Her words pierced him, a child's hope against a world too cruel. The SUV's headlights glared closer, and Ethan's pulse raced. Whoever they were, they wanted Lila, or her notebook, or both. He reached over, resting a hand near hers, not touching but close enough to comfort. "We'll get there, kiddo," he said, his voice a lifeline. The road to Rosewood loomed ahead, promising answers or danger, and Ethan felt the weight of a child's trust, a burden heavier than any merger, yet one he'd carry to keep her safe. Lila's tiny frame curled on the icy tile of Terminal Tessera, her pink coat frayed at the seams, soaked at the sleeves from wiping tears no one seemed to notice, her messy blonde hair clinging to her cheeks as passengers rushed past with purpose, ignoring the fragile sound of a child sobbing into the noise of rolling luggage and overhead announcements. She clutched a small teddy bear with one eye missing and sat beside a vending machine like a forgotten bag, too quiet for security, too invisible for kindness. Her feet, dangling above the ground in scuffed shoes too small for comfort, kicked absently as her swollen eyes scanned the crowds, hoping for one familiar face, her mother's, yet finding only strangers too busy to care. Announcements echoed around her about flights bound for Paris, Dubai, and New York, but none for the little girl waiting all alone. She whimpered softly, shivering as the cold floor seeped into her bones, and still, no one saw her pain. A businessman on a call walked right past her, muttering about profits while she whispered, "Mommy?" to no one. A mother dragging her toddler looked at Lila for half a second before averting her gaze. A flight attendant gave her a glance, then kept walking. Every second was another silent rejection. Another heartbreak for a child too young to understand abandonment. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Please. Someone." But the airport swallowed her words like it had swallowed her hope. Her stomach ached from hours without food, her mouth dry from crying, her mind a fog of fear and questions she couldn't form. She wasn't sure how long it had been since her mommy told her, "Wait here, sweetie, I'll be right back." Maybe an hour. Maybe forever. She didn't know time, only the weight of being left behind. As tears traced paths down her dirt-smudged cheeks, she hugged the bear tighter, its fur matted with old love and fresh grief. Her lips trembled, and a soft whimper slipped out again, barely louder than the dragging suitcase wheels echoing off the high glass ceiling. Then, amid the stampede of indifference, a pause, a quiet breath in the chaos. Expensive shoes halted in front of her. She looked up slowly, fearful and unsure.
Semi the way what ningerim zihedro, dash deal the robbing its cats open its sisters it had one, seer clubus it had nerechna, her yasip passnet therapy because get some tap of a rim is not has a wish lurk solid such as a well sever singer up sick of singing off, Niams in it womp scalzor, Suresh the crom net surgerum was a thin of dear ebb, he remembered. Sabbath of so winging it. Marfia would already who hadn't worth me her steer snob na he asked to her out the folk observe and he asked those dear mems in the thing garage. Fatish in the derpies bats der wolf miss it. Heb machten de dishne. Hurry here with him lost imam. Slofen sich, halal. Meast malen it zit karten da he recht the wil merftsiov. Sai. Stratius, me en risto. Sion naar pap zo ik al neer brengen sa. Nerfitne, he zip zo met naar receive vier vet up. Her milk yamuhino we no mas surfing ishters. No I gully. Sense of black the wooden gas, sashed in the feet law were of no observe be that that's make the sea first gotten it. Her snide at the cap skittish fizza. Did on nish. Staugers and get governed it being a showman and airshipsy of the. One or toss, and I did remember me. One. Serene it served didn't he who along it must have been that flows its happy spickish fizza. See a graffiti with the brave birch sluffy. Smell fuck chill ups if I did milks the allorets stroke braid. Shen if it break no one near or sickle me hofib nil var not zops in the senate zoo lash nil merfs in the lore would it illic like sin you dip in the jill looking dust of the free not draw will see. Carf draw her marlowsy, serene master for the fnet, her very stick moved or bean at another while new cat, him on mammy suiva, and the self goes darfer, see how will be reached till I'll with nidrates, yelled in the feet, and the silnet, spline, so who hers near say up fell to her thumb my abnavidan, he'd ich gesap on. Roar gab den is snipsach de, reich getsai fußblor one is roar of nola, halne. Said one desla no one blash de was in the zipper, the in dagger de horse singeth must knife such de, he abduch in with your vet the war is rany lib, geld in the feet, and the fast math, our set on a merch for all for not even a mich wilker slumps than it up new in it nix vel, and locked snipsnina, and it was the ignivum back with my riddler wood, here's simna, here remember up the gate rocks in it. Gesimmt bad serven nichts abs immer no mas nis line no mas hasi, nikas fear burf, her hasi now fu no mas with more with it nor visit, her self go to linilish, kafni, yeah well often did dish up, her vilk pillar waller, we're splaffit up, mehnavit ze arf besner wood, Henry him up, so him das silv, derpse we, stratius, one. Sear and more hutloid descend that scalp go look nip niller good salts and nine lots sick waffne. Oždex nosing your own get, near it sloppy but your own get, her old footballish did your own get, one ill of plenty. Here shall nets moved up now hib dear ebbing all it must, sashed in it fishing it must dim the self looking instead. Him on mammy suive. Sal gutter gelt carxy over, her ebb and my rung in the afternoon homster, sloker in beck nil boppy bewood, leaves a wee ferosh not nil bish. Ech wo ya, her not gelling in my brought up, bliss gelsy ov, he'll fast desi, her the. Here was nicht such snigger at one bush the zitay, bird or where asnes er thummer and the home throws up stauzy. Her there fing here by the walls darfing it must swerf both by who in each gel, he'll and show mid up, he'll as if such Donald Veller who's flies minger all, and they nearly set their woe field else left nair city, loyat seal gifer, so where helpsy. Here was 2 year thummer zero summer snarf, but geller hofi being no na ill all splin, throws in it flows if thought in the seal for dus really stool boy or running emma. Nurse self block and in her offing it must do up. He ripped the unbelief see how will misery them the viral burn.
Guilt like a shadow. We'll figure it out. She blinked up at him, her little face still wary, but something in her posture eased like she didn't fully trust him yet, but she wanted to believe. A security officer passed by, giving Ethan a nod of recognition, but said nothing about the child beside him. That silence only deepened his anger. Why had no one stopped for her? How many others had seen her and walked on? The thought disgusted him, and he pulled out his phone, not to check emails, but to search for nearby help, child services, missing persons anything. But Lila's small hand tugged his sleeve, stopping him. Are you a daddy? She asked so softly it felt like wind. Ethan's breath hitched. I used to be. Her eyes widened. What happened? He looked away, pain flashing across his face like lightning through clouds. I made a mistake, he admitted, voice nearly inaudible. She didn't press, just nodded solemnly, as if understanding more than any 6-year-old should. The airport buzzed around them, impersonal and cold, but this moment just the two of them on a tile floor was warmer than anything Ethan had felt in years. He loosened his tie slightly, heart pounding in unfamiliar territory. Do you want to wait with me until we find your mommy? He asked gently, and this time, she nodded. But what if she doesn't come back? The question wasn't dramatic, it was real, raw, and filled with a truth Ethan wasn't ready to face either. Then I'll stay until we know for sure, he replied. I promise. He hadn't said those words in over a decade, but the second they left his mouth, he knew he meant them. She leaned into him a little, not touching him fully, but enough to signal her silent approval. And just like that, a man who had built empires, who had turned down love in the name of ambition, who had closed doors to protect himself from vulnerability, found his heart slowly opening again it with grand gestures, but in the small, trembling hand of a girl who asked nothing from him except to be seen, to be heard, to be helped. And Ethan Blake, the stranger in a suit, finally realized he wasn't meant to walk away this time. Ethan stayed silent for a moment, staring down at the small girl beside him as her eyes flickered with both fear and fragile hope, and though his phone kept buzzing with reminders about his delayed jet and high-stake meetings, he muted the device without a second thought, because nothing felt more urgent than understanding the mystery behind this child's presence here. He leaned in slightly, softening his voice as he asked, "Lila, do you know your full name?" Her forehead creased and she looked down, clutching the teddy bear tighter, then shook her head slowly. "Just Lila. That's what Mommy calls me." Ethan swallowed hard. No last name, no ID, no suitcase, no coat aside from the threadbare pink one barely shielding her from the cold airport air conditioning. He scanned the floor instinctively, searching for a forgotten bag or scrap of paper, but all he saw was a child left in the middle of nowhere, like luggage someone never came back for. "Do you know where you live?" He tried again. She bit her lip and whispered, "I think. We were on a bus, for a long time. And then Mommy said we'd go on a plane, but she had to go to the bathroom first." Ethan's pulse quickened not from panic, but from the overwhelming weight of what this might mean. He was no longer entertaining the idea that her mother was nearby. He was starting to fear the unthinkable that she wasn't coming back. The thought made him sit up straighter, the businessman in him analyzing the pieces, while the man underneath the one who had once been a father felt something inside him begin to ache. "How long ago did Mommy leave you here?" he asked gently. Lila looked around, confused by time. The lights turned off once. And back on again. "So maybe. Yesterday?" That sentence hit Ethan like a punch to the chest. She had been alone all night in a crowded airport, invisible to every soul rushing past. He inhaled sharply, jaw tightening as he rose to his feet and extended a hand. "Come with me, Lila. We're going to fix this." She hesitated, then placed her tiny hand in his, trusting him not because of his wealth or his charm, but because he was the only one who had stayed. He walked her toward a quieter part of the terminal, where his assistant stood anxiously by with flight updates, but the second Ethan approached, she froze, eyes darting to the little girl. "Delay the jet," Ethan said flatly, without a glance. "But, sir," she began, but he cut her off. "Indefinitely." It was a word he had never used so lightly, and it startled everyone within earshot. Lila stayed close to him, half hiding behind his leg as they reached a row of lounge chairs. He crouched beside her again and said, "We're going to find your mom, okay? But first, we need help." He called airport security, requesting to speak with someone discreetly. As they waited, he turned back to Lila. "Do you remember anything else? What your mommy wore? Her hair?" Lila tilted her head, eyes flickering with effort. "Brown hair, and she had a red bag. She said we'd go somewhere safe." Ethan's heart clenched. Whatever this mother was escaping from, it must have been terrifying enough to leave her daughter behind, and he didn't know whether to feel furious at her or heartbroken for her. When the officer arrived, Ethan took him aside and explained what he knew, watching Lila through the glass as she sat solemnly, swinging her legs, looking so small in a world too big and cold. The officer asked standard questions, but even he looked shaken when Ethan explained how long the girl had been alone. "We'll check the cameras," the man said. "And put out a notice." Ethan nodded but didn't feel relieved. He felt responsible, as if fate had dropped this child in his path for a reason he hadn't yet understood. He ordered food for her, something warm and soft, and sat beside her again as she nibbled at fries like she wasn't used to eating full meals. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly, looking up with wide eyes. He hesitated. "Because I should have helped someone else once, and I didn't." Her eyes softened, like her soul understood pain in ways no child should. She reached over and touched his wrist lightly. "Maybe you get to try again now." Ethan felt his throat tighten, and for once, he didn't fight the emotion. As the airport bustled around them, Ethan realized that whatever happened next, whether Lila's mother was found or not, couldn't walk away from her, not now, not ever. She had been left by the world, but maybe, just maybe, she had been found by the one person who needed her just as much. As Ethan sat beside Lila, watching her nibble on the last of her fries, the airport security officer returned with a small tablet in hand and an expression that immediately told him the truth wasn't going to be kind. Without a word, the officer guided Ethan a few steps away from Lila, turned the screen toward him, and pressed play. The footage, grainy but clear enough, showed a woman in a red hoodie clutching Lila's hand. Her brown hair tied into a messy bun, her eyes darting nervously as she scanned the terminal. Ethan watched breathlessly as the woman led Lila to a bench near the vending machines, knelt down to whisper something in her ear, kissed her forehead, then stood, glanced around one last time, and walked away. No suitcase. No hesitation. No return. Ethan felt something inside him snap, not in anger but in sheer disbelief that a mother could do this, that the girl sitting just 20 feet away had been placed there intentionally, left like forgotten luggage with nothing but hope in her eyes. "That's it?" Ethan asked, voice low and tight. The officer nodded solemnly. "She doesn't come back on any of the footage. We're still scanning surrounding gates, but it's like she vanished." Ethan stared at the screen, unable to look away from the heartbreaking simplicity of it all. A quiet goodbye masked as a quick errand. A child left waiting in a crowd of strangers. His hands clenched into fists by his sides, jaw tight with helpless fury. But when he turned to look at Lila again, his anger melted into something softer, protective, determined, fatherly. She was now lying across two lounge chairs, her head on a folded jacket someone had offered her, one hand still holding the teddy bear, the other clutching the corner of Ethan's forgotten handkerchief like a lifeline. He returned to her side, sinking into the chair with a heavy breath, trying to figure out how to explain to a 6-year-old that her mother wasn't just lost but gone, possibly forever. She blinked sleepily and whispered, "Did you find her?" Ethan hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Not yet, sweetie, but we're trying." She nodded slowly, as if bracing herself for disappointment she already suspected. "Sometimes mommy cried when she thought I was asleep," she murmured, eyes unfocused. "She said she was scared of someone finding us again." That revelation made Ethan's blood chill. This wasn't abandonment out of cruelty, it was protection disguised as disappearance. "Did she ever tell you who?" he asked gently, but she only shook her head. "She said I was her angel. And angels need wings to fly away when it's not safe anymore." Ethan felt the lump in his throat swell as he fought back tears he hadn't allowed himself in years. This child had been loved but also hidden, perhaps from something or someone far worse. He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, and she didn't flinch, just turned slightly, nestling against him as if she'd done it 100 times. That simple act unraveled something in Ethan he didn't even know was still wound tight. Time passed slowly in that quiet corner of Terminal Tesserae, the two of them wrapped in an unspoken bond built not through blood but through shared loneliness. He ordered her a soft blanket and a travel pillow, making sure she stayed warm, and as she drifted into sleep, he sat beside her in silence, watching her chest rise and fall like the rhythm of a life he now felt deeply responsible for. His assistant came by with updates, but he waved her off, eyes locked on the little girl who had forced open doors in his soul he thought were long shut. He thought of his own daughter, now a teenager, raised without him, the casualty of a brutal divorce and choices he regretted daily. Could he have done more? Could he have fought harder? And now, looking at Lila, he wondered if this was fate's way of giving him a second chance, not to replace the child he lost, but to prove he still knew how to care, how to love, how to stay. The security officer returned later with more footage, still no sign of the woman reappearing. "We've alerted shelters and local law enforcement," he said. "But if she meant to vanish, she covered her tracks well." Ethan nodded grimly. "Then I'll wait. I'm not leaving her here." His voice was steel, quiet but unshakable. He wasn't just helping out anymore, he was committed. He glanced at Lila again, sleeping so peacefully, unaware of the decisions being made on her behalf. He reached into his phone, not for business, but to call one of the best private investigators he'd ever hired. "I need you to find someone," he said sharply. "No name, no address, just a face from airport footage. I'll send the clip." There was no time for half measures. Ethan wasn't just going to sit back and watch the system fail this girl. She deserved more than waiting rooms and case numbers. She deserved answers. And if those answers came at a cost, this time, his money, his heart, so be it. Because when a child is abandoned, someone has to choose to stay. And Ethan Blake, the man who once let go of his own daughter's hand, was finally ready to hold on to someone again. The airport lights dimmed into their overnight glow, soft and hollow, stretching shadows across the glossy floor as the late hours of the night settled in, and while the rest of the world tucked into red-eye flights or dozed with headphones on, Ethan remained seated in the quiet corner of Terminal Tessera, unmoved and unwavering, with a sleeping Lila curled up across his lap like she belonged there. Her little breaths, light and warm against his chest, stirred something ancient inside him, something he had buried beneath years of contracts, titles, and walls made from pride. He rested his hand gently on her back, feeling the tiny rise and fall of her ribs, and for a moment, he didn't see the terminal, or the people, or the schedule he'd abandoned. He saw a memory, sharp and cruel, of a courtroom echoing with silence after a judge's gavel had shattered his world. The image of his daughter, not much older than Lila then, being led away by her mother's lawyer, her tearful glance back, the silent scream in her eyes as she reached for him. God. He had tried to be strong, tried to believe that letting go was the best thing, that his work, his money, his influence would one day give him the power to make it right. But power never filled that void, not for a moment. And now, as this little girl lay peacefully against him, her tiny fingers still curled around the corner of his blazer, he realized how desperately his heart had missed being needed in the most innocent way. She didn't care about his name. She didn't know his empire. She simply felt safe beside him, and that safety was something no wealth could fabricate. He stared blankly ahead, his eyes glazed not with sleep but with unspoken memories, bedtime stories he never got to finish, birthday candles he never lit, milestones watched from a distance through social media instead of from a front-row seat. He wondered where his own daughter was right now, 16, probably in high school, maybe falling in love, maybe hating him without even knowing why. He hadn't heard her voice in years. Not since the last court-ordered call where she barely spoke and he hung up with a hole in his soul. And now, this child, this lost, sweet girl with nowhere else to go, had unknowingly stepped into that hollow space and begun stitching it back together without saying a word. Lila stirred slightly, whimpering in her sleep, and Ethan immediately bent down, whispering, "It's okay. I've got you." His voice cracked as he said it, because it wasn't just reassurance, it was a vow, a promise, one he had once failed to keep for another child. He didn't know if he was ready to be anyone's father again, didn't know if he had the right to even think about it, but in that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that he would not leave this girl's side, not now, not ever. A cleaning cart rolled past, and the janitor gave him a quiet nod, recognizing the raw sincerity in the way Ethan sat protectively over the child. He nodded back, grateful for the silence, for the stillness, for the moment to just feel. His assistant had left hours ago, knowing nothing mattered now except this. The investigator had sent a messagino updates yet, but Ethan didn't read it. For once in his life, he didn't need answers before morning. What he needed was this. The weight of a sleeping child reminding him of what love felt like, what sacrifice sounded like, what healing looked like. In the shape of a 6-year-old breathing trust into his broken chest. Lila shifted again, pressing closer, murmuring a dream speech only children understand, and Ethan found himself brushing her hair back gently, studying every strand like it held secrets about how to be whole again. He remembered once reading that love isn't loud, it's in the stillness, in the choosing, in the staying. He hadn't stayed last time. But now, in a deserted airport lounge where time moved slow and quiet, he was choosing differently. His heart, once ironclad and cold, now throbbed with purpose and fear and something dangerously close to hope. The kind of hope that dares to believe in second chances. The kind that doesn't ask for permission but takes root in silence and grows wildly in unexpected places. And as Lila sighed in her sleep, a small smile brushing her lips, Ethan let his eyes close to, not in rest, but in quiet surrender to a new chapter beginning beneath the flicker of terminal lights and the softest, most human of connections. A man broken by his past. And a girl who gave him back his reason to stay. The early morning quiet was broken only by the faint hum of distant vacuums and the occasional beep of a cart backing into place, the world still cloaked in a hushed blue calm as Ethan opened his eyes to the gentle weight of Lila resting against him, her hand loosely curled on his chest, her face peaceful in a way that made him forget the airport existed. But before he could fully sit up, a soft cough interrupted the moment. A janitor in a gray uniform stood a few feet away, cap slightly tilted, eyes hesitant but alert. "Sorry, sir," he whispered. "Didn't mean to bother you. But I think you should see this." He held out a small piece of paper, its edges crumpled and damp from what looked like a trash bin, torn across the middle but still legible. Ethan took it cautiously, careful not to wake Lila, and as his eyes scanned the jagged scrawl, his breath caught. In shaky handwriting, written with what looked like a fading black pen, were the words, "Forgive me, she deserves better than I could give. Please. Don't hate me." At the top, in careful, slanted letters, was a single name, Lila. Ethan's fingers tightened around the paper, and for a moment, the world blurred at the edge. This wasn't abandonment fueled by malice, it was heartbreak. The kind that only surfaces when a parent, broken and cornered, sees surrender as the only path left for their child to survive. He looked up at the janitor, who added gently, "Found it in the women's restroom trash. Didn't feel right just tossing it." Ethan nodded slowly, respect gleaming in his eyes. "Thank you. You did the right thing." The janitor gave a humble nod and walked away, leaving Ethan alone with a note that screamed of sorrow louder than any shout. He studied the torn edge, wondering if more had been lost, perhaps an address, a name, a reason beyond what the desperate scrawl could express. Lila shifted slightly, her eyes fluttering open with a quiet yawn, and Ethan quickly tucked the note into his inner jacket pocket before she could see it. She blinked up at him, voice soft with morning grogginess. "Are we still here?" He smiled faintly, brushing hair from her eyes. "Yeah, but we're not stuck. We're just waiting for answers." She nodded trustingly, as if his presence alone gave her permission to believe things would be okay. He walked her to a nearby sink to freshen up, letting her splash cold water on her cheeks, and as she giggled from the icy surprise, Ethan found himself smiling, truly smiling for the first time in what felt like ages. But behind the warmth lingered questions that refused to rest. Who was Lila's mother? What drove her to this breaking point? And was she still out there, watching from afar, or gone somewhere no one could reach? Ethan returned to their corner and pulled out his phone, sending a photo of the note to his private investigator with a brief but urgent message: "New lead. Find handwriting experts. Trace paper origin. Anything." As the hours passed, his thoughts spiraled. The tone of the note haunted him. It wasn't cold, wasn't careless. It was pleading. She deserves better. That single line looped in his head. What kind of torment pushes a mother to leave behind the one soul she lives for? Was there danger involved? Abuse? Poverty so severe that disappearing felt like a mercy? Ethan's instincts buzzed. This wasn't a case of neglect. This was protection wrapped in heartbreak. And suddenly, his role in this child's life didn't feel like charity anymore, it felt like destiny. As Lila sat beside him drawing with crayons a kind worker had provided, sketching hearts and stick figures that oddly resembled the two of them holding hands, Ethan studied her quiet focus, the slight furrow in her brow, the tiny hum she made when coloring. She was resilient, a beam of light in a story shadowed by confusion. "That's me," she said proudly, pointing to the taller stick figure. "And that's you. I gave you cool hair." Ethan chuckled, touched beyond words. "You're quite the artist." She beamed, but then her smile faltered. "Do you think Mommy's mad I drew someone else?" His breath caught. He kneeled beside her and took her tiny hand in his. "No, sweetheart. I think your mommy just wanted you to feel safe. And that's what we're doing, okay? Just finding safe." Her lip trembled, but she nodded, believing him because to her, he wasn't a stranger anymore. He was safety in a suit. And to Ethan, she wasn't just a girl someone left behind, she was a girl who gave him a second chance to feel human again. As they sat together under the dull hum of terminal lights, the broken note pressed close to his heart, Ethan knew this wasn't the end of the story, it was just the first real clue. And behind it lay a deeper truth, one that would shake everything he thought he knew about love, sacrifice, and the impossible choices made when the world gives you none. As the terminal's overhead lights flickered into the dull glow of a new morning, Ethan rose from the stiff airport bench, his mind spinning with questions and the weight of the crumpled note pressed to his chest like a vow not yet fulfilled. Lila remained beside him, sketching sunrises and stick hearts while humming softly to herself, but Ethan's eyes were sharp, his posture tensed with purpose. This wasn't just about comfort anymore, it was about truth. Pulling his phone from his coat pocket, he stepped away and dialed a private number only a few in his circle even knew. "It's urgent," he said the moment the call connected. "I need everything on a woman, no full name yet, but I have footage, a note, and a child with no traceable past." The investigator on the other end, Colton, a man with more reach than some intelligence agencies, listened without interruption, then replied, "Send me what you have. I'll start digging now." Ethan forwarded the surveillance video, the scanned image of the note, and every detail Lila had offered in her innocent honesty, no matter how smothered: bag, brown hair, a long bus ride, a mommy who cried at night and whispered things she thought her daughter couldn't hear. As he returned to Lila's side, he saw her face light up when she saw him, and something inside him shifted again, not with sadness this time, but with fierce responsibility. She stood, wrapping her arms around his waist, and said, "You came back fast." He knelt and looked her in the eyes. "I'll always come back. Always." Those words, unplanned but deeply meant, settled between them like an unspoken pact. Hours passed. Colton called again. "We found something," he said, his voice lower, heavier. "Your girl's name is Lila Arden. No father listed. Her mother Miranda Arden has no stable address, bounced between shelters for years. Records show she filed multiple complaints against a man named Rick Holden, ex-boyfriend, criminal record, history of domestic abuse." Ethan's stomach tightened. He listened as Colton continued. "She fled 3 states over. Used cash only. It's clear she wasn't abandoning her daughter. She was hiding her from him." Ethan pressed the phone harder to his ear, his heart thudding. "Where is Miranda now?" A pause. "Unknown. Last spotted 2 weeks ago entering a clinic. No discharge. No forwarding info. We're still tracking." Ethan hung up, pacing a few steps away, overwhelmed by the brutal reality that this wasn't a case of a careless parent, it was a mother's desperate attempt to save her child from a monster. He turned back to Lila, now sipping juice with sleepy eyes, and something burned in his chest, not just compassion, but anger at a world that let this happen. He sat beside her again, struggling with the knowledge he now held. "Did Mommy ever mention a man?" he asked softly. Lila's face fell. Her voice shrank. "A scary man. She said if he ever found us, we'd have to run again." Ethan's hands clenched in his lap, not from fear but resolve. "He's not going to hurt you. Not ever," he said, and the words felt like armor wrapping around them both. He reached out and gently held her hand. "You're safe now. With me." Her little fingers gripped his tighter, and though she said nothing, the look in her eyes said she believed him. That belief shattered something old in Ethan, something cold he'd carried too long. As she leaned against his side, he promised himself he'd do whatever it took to protect her, whether that meant courtrooms or shadows or enemies from the past. He made another call, this time to his legal team. "Begin emergency guardianship paperwork. Name, Lila Arden. Age, 6. No known guardians. Expedite it." His voice was sharp with purpose, his status finally being used not to close a business deal, but to give a child a real chance at life. He hung up and turned back to Lila, who was now drawing again. "Can I stay with you forever?" she asked, barely a whisper. He hesitated for a moment that felt like eternity. "If you'll let me, yes." Her smile was soft, broken, beautiful. The kind of smile that comes from a child learning what trust feels like again. As the airport bustled with life, none of it touched them, not the announcements, not the wheels of suitcases dragging by, not even the passing time. All that mattered was this fragile moment between a man finding redemption and a girl reclaiming her sense of safety. And somewhere, out in the unknown, a mother's silent prayer whispered through the cracks of despair. "Let someone love her better than I ever could." Ethan Blake had heard heightened he wasn't going to fail her. The warmth of Lila's small hand still wrapped in Ethan's lingered like a vow he'd just made when Colton called again, this time his voice carrying the weight of something discovered but hard to deliver. "We traced Miranda's last known contact," he said. Found a prepaid phone. It was dropped at a clinic near the bus station 3 weeks ago. I had someone pick it up. It's old, cracked, barely working, but it's hers. Ethan's breath caught as he listened. And? Colton hesitated. The phone is filled with unsent texts. Drafts. Notes. And one voicemail, you need to hear it for yourself. Ethan closed his eyes for a second, steeling himself. Send it. Minutes later, the message arrived. Ethan stepped away from Lila, now busy coloring the sky purple on her paper with fierce, innocent concentration. He slipped into a quiet alcove behind a column, plugged in his earbuds, and pressed play. Static. Then a soft breath. Then her voice. Miranda's voice. Fragile, trembling. Full of the kind of pain that seeps into every corner of a heart. If anyone ever finds this, please understand. I tried. I tried everything. I gave up food to feed her. I stayed in shelters that made me feel like I didn't exist. I looked over my shoulder every single day, waiting to see his face again. I begged the system, I begged strangers. No one ever answered. No one listened. But Lila, she's good. She's so good. She sings when she eats, and hugs without reason, and tells her teddy bear secrets like they're sacred. I failed her. But maybe someone else won't. Ethan felt the breath leave his lungs as the message ended. He stood frozen, head tilted against the cold wall behind him. His jaw tight as waves of emotion crashed through him like a storm he'd tried to outrun his whole life. She hadn't abandoned her child in apathy, had surrendered out of agony. The truth was never neglected, was a mother screaming into silence. He opened the phone's messaging app. Dozens of drafts appeared, none sent. Please take her in. I don't know who else to call. She's all I have left. Each one time-stamped, each one never delivered. He scrolled through until one caught his eye. It was addressed to E. Blake. Confused, Ethan opened it. You don't know me, but I know who you are. I saw your name on the shelter donor wall. I saw how many you've helped. If you ever see a little girl alone in pink with a bear, her name is Lila. She's mine. And she deserves a life that doesn't feel like hiding. I don't expect a miracle. I just pray someone like you notices. Ethan nearly dropped the phone. His name. His name had been in her hope. She had seen him not as a millionaire or CEO but as a last lifeline. And somehow, the universe, fate, or some higher mercy had crossed their paths right where she hoped it would. He blinked hard, brushing his knuckles against his eyes, as if it would erase the ache forming behind them. Walking back toward Lila, who now looked up from her drawing with that wide, trusting expression, he realized she had no idea how close she had come to being completely lost. He knelt, pulling her into his arms, holding her tighter than he ever had. Did I do something wrong? She asked softly, sensing the storm behind his eyes. No, sweetheart, he whispered, voice cracking. You did everything right. Everything. She nestled into him, unaware of the voicemail that had shattered him inside, the messages that would haunt him long after this moment passed. Ethan made another call, this time to a journalist friend he trusted. I need to find someone. Her name is Miranda Arden. I want the story shared but carefully. She's not a criminal. She's a mother who ran out of options. The friend agreed, and Ethan promised anonymity, safety, and the truth. Lila deserved to grow up knowing her mother didn't walk away in coldness but in courage. Later, back in the lounge, he sat quietly as Lila curled beside him, her head resting on his lap once more. The airport buzzed around them, but Ethan was lost in the gravity of a revelation. He had spent his life surrounded by noise and power, yet it took the silence of one voicemail to finally understand what it meant to truly matter to someone. Miranda hadn't failed. The world had failed her. And now, with Lila in his arms and her future within reach, Ethan Blake would not let it happen again. The low murmur of the terminal faded into the background as Ethan gently ran his fingers through Lila's soft hair, her breathing even, her body curled safely beside him like she had belonged there all along, and as he sat watching her tiny chest rise and fall, the last fragments of Miranda's voicemail echoed in his mind like a hymn of desperation that somehow became a prayer answered. He didn't notice when she stirred, only realized it when her head lifted slowly, her eyes blinking open with a sleepy smile and a tiny voice that said, I dreamed we had a garden. Ethan smiled, unsure how to respond to the purity in that sentence, But when Lila reached into the bag of crayons and paper she'd been carrying like a treasure chest, she pulled out a folded page with creases and smudges like it had been drawn in secret, guarded like something sacred. "I made this for you," she whispered, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded the crinkled sheet. Ethan leaned closer, expecting another playful sketch, but when he saw it froze. There in bold, crayon-colored strokes were 3 stick figures. One tall with black hair and a blue suit, one small with golden curls in a pink dress, and between them a house with a garden and a heart floating above the roof. Beneath the figures were labels. "Me, you, and home." His throat closed. "You drew this?" he asked gently, stunned by the intimacy of it. She nodded and whispered, "This is what happy looks like, if you want it too." That single sentence cracked through every wall he had built over years of boardrooms and silence, splitting open the hollow corridors of his success to reveal how empty they'd always been. He looked down at the drawing again, his eyes misting, as he saw what she saw: not wealth, not titles, but belonging. A home not made of marble and glass but of warmth and presence. "Lila," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "you make me feel like I finally found something I didn't know I was looking for." She tilted her head, puzzled but smiling. "Like a surprise?" He nodded, laughing softly through the tightness in his chest. "The best kind." He stared at the picture again, but this time it didn't feel like a child's dream. It felt like a map to a future he never believed was meant for him. All his life he had defined success by achievement, milestones, mergers, and money. But here, in the trembling hands of a 6-year-old, was a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful life is the one that asks nothing of you except that you show up with your heart open. He turned to her, cupping her cheek. "Would you like that house someday?" Her eyes lit up with something between hope and disbelief. "With a swing?" He chuckled, choking on the emotion. "With 2 swings." She nodded enthusiastically and returned to her drawing, adding a sun and birds with the confidence of someone who believed it might really happen. Ethan leaned back and stared at the ceiling, overwhelmed by the shift within him. How had this little girl, broken by the world and stitched together with resilience, become the compass pointing him back to meaning? He had poured his life into skyscrapers and schedules, but none of it made his heart race like the sound of her giggle or the way she whispered home like it was a promise. Every decision he'd made now felt like a path that led him here, to this very moment. His phone buzzed again. Updates from his team. Another acquisition closing, a new venture preparing to launch. He turned the screen over without reading. None of it mattered right now, not when a child had just handed him a blueprint for healing. "You okay?" Lila asked softly, noticing his faraway eyes. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I am now." She smiled and returned to coloring, completely unaware that her innocent drawing had just caused a man who owned empires to rethink the very definition of legacy. And as she added tiny flowers near the doorstep of their imagined home, Ethan realized something stunning. He didn't just want to protect her, wanted to raise her, to guide her, to build a life with her laughter echoing in the halls and crayon art on the walls. The drawing, once just a few scribbles on a page, now burned into his memory like a vision, a goal more meaningful than anything money could buy. And as the airport bustled back to life around them, Ethan folded the picture carefully and placed it inside his jacket pocket, not just to keep it safe, but to carry it forward as a silent vow of the life he would now chase with everything in him. Ethan tucked Lila's drawing safely inside his inner jacket pocket like it was a living promise, unaware that within the hour, everything would begin to unravel. The moment he stepped outside the terminal with her small hand wrapped trustingly in his, 2 suited officials approached with clipped voices and solemn expressions. "Child Protective Services. We received a report of a child left unattended. We need to speak with you," one of them said, their eyes scanning Ethan not with warmth, but suspicion. Lila clutched his side, instinctively hiding behind his leg, her eyes wide with fresh fear. Ethan's jaw tensed, shielding her with his arm. "She wasn't left. I found her. I've already contacted my legal team. I've applied for emergency guardianship. But bureaucracy has no heart, and the agents weren't moved by emotion or sincerity. Until paperwork is finalized, the child must remain in our custody." Lila let out a soft whimper, her eyes watering as she looked up at Ethan. "Please don't let them take me." His chest shattered at the sound. "You can't," he told them, his voice cracking. "She's already been abandoned once. She's scared. She's safe with me. But it didn't matter, regulations had a script. Within minutes, she was being pulled from him as gently as possible, but no force is ever gentle enough when love is being separated. She screamed his name as he ran after the van, banging on the windows. "I'll fix this. I promise," he yelled, as tears streamed down her cheeks. And just like that, she was gone. Back inside his car, Ethan didn't collapse, he ignited. Calls were made. His attorneys were activated. The best family law firm in the country was hired before sundown. "We're going to get her back," he growled into the speaker. "I want every form filed, every precedent pulled, and if we have to take this all the way to the Supreme Court we will." But the storm didn't stop there. By morning, headlines exploded. Billionaire CEO involved in custody battle over abandoned girl. Photos from the airport leaked. Accusations stirred. Was it a publicity stunt? Was he manipulating a vulnerable child? Ethan's board called an emergency meeting, stockholders panicked, and his PR team begged him to step away from the situation. "This could ruin everything," his publicist warned. "Step back before it becomes irreversible." But Ethan, seated behind his desk with Lila's drawing in hand, looked up slowly and replied, "Let it burn, then." For once, he didn't care about damage control, he cared about a little girl who had finally drawn a picture of what happiness could look like, and the world was trying to rip it away from her again. As legal battles unfolded, Ethan was forced to answer deeply personal questions in court about his past, his parenting, his failed relationship with his own daughter. He took it all, unflinching, because every bruise was worth it if it brought him closer to Lila. He testified about the note, the voicemail, the shelter records, the abuse Miranda had run from. His team presented witness statements, the footage, the emotional trauma already inflicted on a 6-year-old who deserved peace. Still, the courtroom remained cold, its walls too rigid to see a bond beyond blood. But when they brought Lila in to testify, quiet, nervous, her shoes swinging above the floor, everything changed. She looked across the room, found Ethan's eyes, and whispered, "I just want to go home, with him." That single sentence cracked the tension in the room like thunder. Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes as she pulled a crumpled paper from her coat pocket, the drawing. She held it up proudly. "This is the home I made. He's in it." Silence fell. The judge cleared his throat. "We'll review all matters and return with a decision," he said quietly, but the emotional blow had already landed. As the courtroom emptied, Ethan knelt beside her. "No matter what happens, you're the bravest girl I've ever known." She smiled through tears. "Did I do okay?" He cupped her face, kissed her forehead, and nodded. "You did more than okay. You reminded them what love looks like." That night, alone in his penthouse, he ignored the flashing messages from investors, the cold stares from his board, and the threats from rivals already circling his weakened empire. Let them come. Let them try. Because for the first time, Ethan wasn't building towers, was building something unshakable. A family. A future. And no force on earth was going to take that from him. The skyline outside Ethan's penthouse flickered under the weight of evening clouds, but inside, the world felt even heavier as he sat alone, the silence thick, the legal decision still pending, and Lila once again placed in temporary state care, away from the only arms that had held her with real love in recent days. He stared at the drawing she'd once given him, now framed beside his bed, his heart tightening with every second that passed without her laughter echoing through the hallways. Then, just as despair threatened to suffocate the last thread of hope, his assistant gently knocked on the door and entered with a soft voice and trembling hands. "This just came for you. From a hospital in Oregon." Ethan took the envelope, his fingers numb, and slowly peeled it open to find a handwritten letter, faded at the edges and stained with tears. As his eyes scanned the delicate, shaky handwriting, his breath caught. It was from Miranda Arden. Alive. Found unconscious in a shelter after collapsing from exhaustion and untreated illness. The hospital, scanning her belongings, discovered the draft messages, saw Ethan's name, and forwarded the note. The words poured out like a mother's final offering, and each line clung to Ethan's soul like it had been waiting for years to reach him. "Dear Mr. Blake," it began. "If you're reading this, then maybe you did what I prayed someone would, found her, held her, stayed." She spoke of fear of running from Rick, Of nights sleeping in train stations, of skipping meals, so Lila could eat. She described singing lullabies under park benches, pretending they were stars above them, all to keep her child from understanding how cruel the world had been. I wasn't strong enough to give her what she deserves, the letter admitted. But I see now, maybe you are. Ethan's hands trembled as he read on. She's not just sweet. She's sunshine. And if her smile found you, then maybe there's still hope for good men to do more than just witness pain, they can heal it. Miranda's final paragraph shattered him. If I never wake, please don't let her believe I didn't love her. Every breath I took was for her. And if you can give her a life I never could, then be her home. Ethan pressed the paper to his chest, shutting his eyes as his composure cracked. He had spent decades closing deals, sealing contracts, but nothing he'd ever held in his hands felt more sacred than that letter. It wasn't just permission, it was trust, from a mother who had loved her daughter beyond herself. Minutes later, he stood tall, his steps no longer uncertain but fueled with purpose. He called his lawyer. File for full permanent custody. Attach this letter as evidence. The lawyer stammered. That could change everything. Ethan's voice was unwavering. It will. News of the letter spread fast, an undeniable testimony of a mother's love and the validation of Ethan's fight. The media's tone shifted. Public opinion began to sway. Even the boardroom vultures grew silent, sensing something bigger than headlines was taking place. Meanwhile, Lila sat quietly in a government care center, clutching a drawing of Ethan she'd sketched from memory. When an agent told her someone had come to speak on her behalf, she looked up with wide eyes and whispered, "Is it him?" Back in court, the judge now had something no law book could define: a dying mother's last will, written not in legal terms, but in the raw truth of sacrifice. Ethan read it aloud, voice trembling, as Lila sat behind him, holding her bear. When he reached the final words, "Be her home," even the stenographer wiped tears from her cheek. The courtroom held its breath. Then the judge spoke. In light of this new evidence and the emotional testimony of all involved, permanent guardianship is hereby granted to Mr. Ethan Blake. Time paused. Lila ran to him, arms flung wide, and he caught her mid-air like his soul had been waiting just for that moment. "You came back," she whispered. "Forever this time," he replied, voice thick with tears. The world outside the courthouse kept turning, but inside, two broken hearts finally found their way to healing, bound not by blood, but by a letter, a picture, and a promise that love could still rise from the ashes of pain. As they stepped out of the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds like it, too, had been waiting for this moment of healing. Ethan carried Lila in his arms. Her head resting against his shoulder as if she'd always belonged there, as if the universe had finally gotten something right after years of letting it all go so wrong. Photographers lingered behind ropes, but Ethan didn't care about the flashes or the headlines anymore, because the little girl clinging to him wasn't a story or a scandal. She was his daughter now, in every way that mattered. "Where are we going now?" Lila asked softly, her voice barely audible over the sound of birds and distant traffic. Ethan looked down at her, heart aching with quiet joy. "Home," he said. "Our real one." Days later, his grand mansion, once cold, sterile, and silent, was transformed. A pink backpack lay on the marble floor beside tiny shoes. Crayon art lined the once bare hallways. The scent of pancakes replaced the usual espresso bitterness. Laughter bounced off the walls, turning echoes into music. Ethan had once designed his home to impress executives and kings. Now he was redecorating it with night lights, toy baskets, and fairy tale books. Every morning, Lila rushed down the stairs into his arms. Every night, he sat beside her bed, reading stories until her eyes fluttered closed. And somewhere in between, he felt himself healing, not just from losing his past daughter, not just from years of emotional isolation, but from forgetting what truly mattered. One evening, as they planted daisies in the garden, Lila's idea, of course, she looked up and said, "Do you think Mommy knows I'm okay now?" Ethan paused, the breeze brushing his face as he knelt beside her. "I think she never stopped watching. And I think she's really proud of you." Lila smiled, eyes shimmering with peace. "And you?" she asked, wiping soil on her dress. Ethan looked at her with a warmth that burned away every shadow in his life. "You saved me, Lila. More than I could ever save you." Weeks passed, and Ethan didn't return to his CEO desk. He handed over the reins, choosing time over titles. Instead of chasing deals, he chased giggles in the backyard, hosted tea parties with stuffed animals, and taught Lila how to ride a bike without training wheels. There were no reporters at the gate now, no lawyers. Just the sound of a child finally allowed to be a child, and a man finally allowed to feel again. One rainy afternoon, Lila curled beside him on the couch, holding a drawing pad. She handed him her newest creation, another picture of their house. This time, it had 3 hearts over the roof. Ethan smiled. 3? He asked. She pointed. 1 for me. 1 for you. 1 for Mommy. Because she's in every part of this house, even if we can't see her. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes as he hugged her close. That night, after she fell asleep, he wrote a letter he would keep in a safe place for her to read someday. It said, "You came into my life on the cold floor of an airport, and I didn't know then that everything was about to change. You made me believe again. Not in business. Not in power. In love. In second chances. You turned my house into a home. And my heart, once quiet, now beats because of you." As the seasons changed, their life settled into a rhythm of warmth, trust, and growth. Ethan sponsored shelters, in Miranda's name. He started programs for runaway children. He told Lila, as she grew older, the truth about her mom with grace, with respect, and always with love. Lila never forgot her. But she never felt lost again. And Ethan, once a man with everything except peace, finally understood what real wealth looked like: tiny footsteps in the hallway, sleepy arms around his neck, and a whispered "I love you, Daddy" in the quiet of night. Because sometimes family isn't written in blood, but in the silent promises we make and keep. In the end, it wasn't a courtroom, a company, or a contract that changed Ethan Blake's life. It was a 6-year-old girl with tangled curls, tearful eyes, and a drawing of a house filled with hope. And from the ashes of her mother's sacrifice, something beautiful grew. Not just healing. Not just happiness. But a forever kind of home.